Well, Jim, thank you so much for coming to the Center for National Policy. One of the things we're really going to be focused on here is the issue of infrastructure, in part because of the legacy of the center has been primarily around the national security issue, is to include that. But there are obviously a broader economic and sustainability issues associated with any conversation about infrastructure. You've been in China for the last few years looking at what's happening there. What have you learned from that, and how does that, and should that potentially inform how we might think about infrastructure here in the United States?
Part of what you see in China is the development that goes with any country in a stage of rapid growth, going from a sort of pre-modern era to a hyper-modern era. So they have the ports and the roads and all these things, which America was building, as you've written about yourself, starting a century and a half ago and ever since then. So the part of what we see in China is looking towards our past and recognizing the country has to mature. But part of what we also see is sort of the opportunity cost for our future, or the risk for our future, that Americans think, oh, well, the things we have are the best in the world, and often they aren't. Our roads are now inferior, certainly compared to Chinese roads and many in Europe. Our cell phone coverage is much worse than it is in the rest of the world. Many of the other systems that have economies function and keep them safe are falling behind here. So I think a great potential for the next stage in national security and national welfare is to invest in these systems that our grandparents and great-great-grandparents built and we're now letting run down.
Yeah. Some would argue, all right, well, it's easy in China, right? It's a top-down society. You can essentially, the government can decree things to happen and villages are moved out of the way.
Sure.
Is it possible for this country to do what China has been able to accomplish?
Certainly, we couldn't and wouldn't want to do it the Chinese way of just sending in the bulldozers in the middle of the night and saying to hell with environmental regulations and all the rest. So I think a challenge for people who are talking about infrastructure renewal in America, which your center is an important part of, is to say how in the modern U.S. context can we present the need for this kind of investment which will make our children and our grandchildren secure and prosperous in the future. So I think we look to the times in America's past when this has been done, and maybe the Dwight Eisenhower era is the most relevant one, where the interstate highway system, the National Defense Education Act, the beginning of some aerospace programs, it was done in the name of long-term national security. So finding ways to recapture that imagination, I think, is an important part of the process.
Right. I mean, the key seems to be this notion that it's an investment. China, when it was faced with this global economic recession, has made a huge surge of investment in infrastructure. Here in the United States, of course, we primarily put it to attend to our financial markets and being in disarray. How do you deal with the fact that many Americans feel like we can't afford to address this issue?
Well, the question of affordability is such a paradox in American political life. There's certain things which, if you try to do them legislatively, the opponents will say, well, show me where every penny of this is coming from. And other things, we just open the checkbook and pay whatever the cost is. Things in that latter category tend to be defense-related emergencies. We've been rebuilding at least two troubled societies, Iraq and Afghanistan, for a long time. So a lot is possible, including in the realm of affording things, if we have the right imagination, the right combination of a sense of threat and a sense of opportunity. So I think it's a question really of political imagination, which involves also the sort of advocacy groups or activist groups, expert groups like your center and parts of the media in which I'm in, to present to the public a sense that this is an area where if we don't do anything, we're going to be in trouble. And if we do things, we can have a much brighter future than we would otherwise. So that's been the trait of America at certain parts in our history, and I think we need to just figure out how to do that again.
Right. I mean, one last issue is, I think in some cases Americans are wondering if we know how to do this. Yeah. Is your sense that we have the know-how to, and I see it as probably, we wouldn't want to just rebuild the infrastructure the way it was constructed the first time, right? Our economy is different. Environmental issues, we have much more sensitivity about what that's involved. We also have a security challenge in terms of, potentially, rather than 20th century, all our battles were somewhere else, they may end up here.
Right.
In that light, do we have the know-how to tackle this thing?
There's something I know that you have written and spoken about, and most of the American public doesn't realize, which is that if you go around the world and you see the great new airports and the great new bridges and the great new highways being built, largely it's American architects, American engineers, American design teams who are doing this. They're doing it in China, they're doing it in the Middle East, they're doing it in Latin America, they're not doing it here. So the know-how is here. It's a matter of the political circumstances to make it possible.
Right. Well, I want to thank you so much for coming to the center and getting us started on this critical issue here. And thanks for the great work that you do at the Atlantic and in so many other forums and educating the public. I certainly learned a lot from you, and I appreciate you sharing your ideas here at the podcast.
Thank you, and congratulations on what you're doing as you begin your time here at the Center.
Thanks a lot.